At first there was the smell of smoke, and then came black clouds billowing up through the stairway. I was on the 23rd floor in downtown Chengdu. And I thought, if things are bad, I'm going to hear a smoke alarm. Somebody is going to communicate, something will happen. And that was my first world conditioning kicking in. But instead, there was this uneasy quiet as everybody was thinking of what to do. And then immediately, somebody started to go to the window to open up some windows. And another man stopped him, saying, "Don't open the windows. It'll funnel the smoke closer to us." Some people went to the elevator. Others said, "Don't go to the elevator. You're going to get smoked to death in that elevator." And some people took their chances with it. And I'm at this time just sitting there thinking, I know what they tell you to do, but does this apply to China? Does this apply outside the Western industrialized so-called first world? Does that apply here? Is it better to just go with the flow of what everybody's doing? My experiences in China had been that sometimes you over-prepare and it's better to just go with the flow, but other times, especially when it involves nature and what I would consider the kind of problem solving that you develop maybe out hiking in the woods, that's not something that people who grow up in cities always have. So this is rushing through my mind all at once. And I was wondering, do I go to the window? Do I go to the stairs? At the same time, I'm hearing people say, let's go to the higher floors. We can take an elevator up to the 40th floor. And I'm thinking, smoke rises. Fire has a nasty habit of going upwards as well. What are you thinking? So while this is happening, keep in mind, this is just a few seconds that have passed, but my mind is going. Everyone's mind is going. And the arguments are picking up. People are starting to raise their voices at this point. A skinny but smart man was trying to stop a woman from opening the window. And he wasn't able to reason with her, and she opened it. So now smoke was cutting through the room. At this point, I was over to a water cooler. I had wet my shirt, and it was covering my mouth. And I realized that the smoke that you can see isn't the problem. It's all of the chemicals that you don't see. It's the lack of oxygen that's being burnt up that you don't see. People rush into burning buildings. Any firefighter can tell you. And they think, well, I'm going to avoid the fire part. And they pass out and die. And I had no idea what the conditions were. I knew that the building itself was becoming more opaque. It was harder to see. So I went to another room in that building. And I opened a window and I looked down. There was no climbing down. And I thought, well, maybe there's going to be somebody with a helicopter who's going to come to the roof and we're going to go to just fantasy. The reality is that life is cheap. And sometimes it's more expensive to take care of things in the way that you think, well, we have the technology, the money exists in society. Surely my life is going to be worth saving. It's just not. It's not when you look at the big picture. There was going to be no helicopter coming. And hell, just a few days before, I had seen a man in the building across from us working on ventilation or air conditioning systems. He had an electrical cord tied around his waist like a double knot, like a child would do. not like a belay system. And it was an electrical cord that went up about 10 stories more. And he's on the 40th floor. He's way the hell up there. And it was just looped up above. And apparently there's a crew up there, but it wasn't tied to anything. And even if it was an electrical cord. It is not made to sustain human weight. So there's this veneer that I was working with. You know, the elevator systems say made in Switzerland or Germany or someplace where you think, all right, there are engineers there who are really fastidious about this stuff. But the safety protocols themselves, so this is rushing through my mind. And at the same time, I'm trying not to think. I'm trying not to waste oxygen. And I realize I don't know how much longer the smoke is going to keep going. And I'm by the window, and the air smells so much fresher from that window than even a few feet interior in that office. And I know that that's not good. And I knew I had to try to get below, if I could, the floor that was on fire. But I was on the 23rd floor, and I didn't know how far through that black smoke I would need to go, how far I would have to descend into that hell made of toxic chemicals billowing up before I could get below it to where maybe the air was better. But I knew I had to act, because if I sat there in a state of indecision, it could end very poorly. So I took out my phone and I called Lon. She started to talk about something she had seen. I just cut her off. I said, I love you. And she cried immediately. She knew something was off because, I wasn't in the habit of interrupting her or being abrupt like that. And I told her the situation. I said, look, I am on the 23rd floor. The building's on fire. I have one shot. So with very little time left, I said, thank you. And that I would call once I made it to the bottom. I cleared my mind, and I remembered a time when I was at the beach and I was held underwater for a long, long time. And I remember not panicking and being in this state of absolute bliss and absolute peace. I had something tied around my wrist that got caught on an object, and I was pulled under the waves for a long time. And I found this state of peace in which I was able to, as I was getting smashed into coral and rocks by these waves, I was able to free myself and get to shore. And I was just remembering that moment, and I was remembering trying to tap into years of meditation practice, years of Qigong. And while I was by that window, I did slight breath hold. And I wasn't sure if I really needed to, because the likelihood that the smoke was blocking oxygen, kicking up nitric oxide was high. But I wanted to make sure by breathing slowly that I could activate nitric oxide to help the red blood cells accept, the hemoglobin accept more oxygen. And so I breathed that way, 8 more breaths, and I went to the stairs. And I knew that once I hit the stairs, I would hold my breath as long as I could, and then I would be exhaling more forcefully than I was going to breathe in. And this is my strategy. So I got to the stairs with no thoughts. And I just felt a state of calm because I couldn't afford tension. Slight tension or a few more thoughts might cost me a flight of stairs. And I didn't know how many flights I would need to get down. As soon as I touched the stairs, I let my hips go completely loose. I glided down with my hand on the rail to find my way. My eyes were closed and my feet were just barely touching the stairs. It was a controlled fall. It's part of a light body technique, and if you practice Tai Chi, the light stepping and the deep bending that you do with the knees, that state of softness is what I tapped into. And I did that control fall. And I was turning and turning and turning down one flight after another after another. And I was already in kind of a hypnotic state. I lost some track of time. I didn't exactly know where I was. But I got kind of out of it. I was, in this really hypnotized kind of no thought state. And finally, it was a combination because I needed to breathe, and I knew I needed to exhale more than inhale. Because when it comes to free diving, it's the breath that's held, it's the carbon dioxide that needs to leave more than the oxygen needs to come in. So your body has a reserve of oxygen in the spleen. The spleen will squeeze to give you more oxygen. But the problem is actually the carbon dioxide that builds up. So I focused on exhaling, long and slow, as I continued that descent. And I kept going and kept going, and finally I hit the bottom. And I saw some daylight through a doorway, and I went through it, and I knew that was an emergency exit. I've seen it every day going up through that building. And I went toward the doors, and I saw that they were chained shut and locked. And I looked around in that building, and whoever the maintenance guy was, it was an illegal store that someone had set up there. It was like they were selling some kind of gold trinkets. I don't know. It was the goods that they had were behind locked glass. But I couldn't get out. And the air was clearer, but I was still choking, trying to breathe. And I was breathing just as slowly as I could through my shirt. And I knew I had to go back up. Because the glass was thick, and it was loose and tied to a chain. I could kick it all day, it wouldn't break. And I looked around, there was nothing in that room I could use to break it with. So I went back up those stairs, and I just kind of used the arm rail and sort of floated up the next couple of flights of stairs. And I saw what looked like a maintenance room or some smaller unofficial door. And I opened it, and I went down another few flights of stairs. And although my vision was kind of burning from the smoke, I smelled the sweet smell of garbage. And I knew I was by the bins in the back. And I kept going toward that smell of garbage. It was one of the best smells because I was at the street level. And as I went through and out, my eyes were tearing up, and I was able to breathe again. Coughing, but I was breathing. I gave Lana a call, and then after about 10 minutes, I went home. Now, I knew I had breathed in God knows what, but certainly it was carcinogenic. So I made an herbal formula. I wrote it for myself, and I got it from a local herbal pharmacy. And it had herbs that were in the category of clearing wind heat, and herbs which were for clearing heat and detoxifying. So generally, I'll speak about just very generally about this category of herbs. Generally, the herbs which clear wind heat help to repair damage, DNA damage that is done by heat or inflammation. That was certainly a factor. They also have aspects in them which improve apoptosis. So when you have a cell that is cancerous, ideally you want that cell to kill itself so it doesn't spread and cause cancer. So by using these herbs, which were for wind heat and to clear heat and detoxify, I was looking to repair the acute damage that had happened so that I didn't have long-term side effects to that damage. And after a few days of coughing more than normal, I kept doing qigong to clear lung heat and eventually got to where I was jogging and doing more aerobic activity, at which point I started to really cough up black stuff and spitting it out. But overall, I was fine. Now, is it the best course of action to go down a staircase that is billowing with smoke? I'm not advising that. It's probably a dumb move. But given that no helicopter was coming, I thought it was better than going to the 40th floor or going higher. I don't know if it's the right thing. I'm not advising it again. It was just in that moment what I felt was the best that I could do. And in the end, I was glad that I knew these things about breathing, that I had trained my mind through meditation, through pressure testing that meditation in martial arts, having people punch at you and kick at you and having people really furious at you, trying to hurt you, and finding peace in that state helped me to maintain my poise when a high-rise building was on fire and I was in that building. And then afterwards, knowing which herbs to take, I feel very thankful for the teachers I've had who have been able to convey this, because I think it helped. I think it helped in that moment. It's helped other times in my life. And that's one of the reasons I do this podcast as well, is if God forbid you're in a similar situation, I hope you can do the best with what you have. Thank you so much for listening to the Botanical Biohacking Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Miles.